Hey guys, welcome to Faith Talks with Kia. Real talk for real people from a biblical worldview. Today's video is a little different. Today's video has been birthed out of all that we've seen going on this past week. From the injustices now, going to the protests, to the riots, to just the violence that we're seeing all over our nation. This video has been birthed out of that. I must say, this past week, I have cried more. I have been weeping more. I have felt levels of anxiety this week that I haven't felt in I don't know how long. My heart breaks. As a mother, as an African-American woman, raising two beautiful Black children, my heart mourns. My heart breaks. My anxiety just is through the roof, because how do I, as a Black mother living in the culture, we have God, and we and my children, we pray every night. And with that, how do I have these conversations with them? How do I look to my son, who loves the police? Who just holds the police in such high esteem. When he sees a police car or a police motorcycle, he gets so excited. He loves the police and the idea of the police so much that for his 5th birthday last November, his father and I went to our local police department and asked if they would send an officer to the party just to, for a few minutes to celebrate with us. And they did. They were so gracious. They sent a wonderful officer to the party. He came bearing gifts. He was like police officer Santa Claus. He came with these little plastic badges and stickers and safety coloring books, and the kids just had a blast. My son talked about that birthday party for weeks afterwards. It was a great time. We had so much fun. And the one thing he talked about, we did a lot for his party, but the one thing he talked about was that police officer that showed up. But I know, and his father knows, that there's a part 2 to that conversation that we have to have with our 5-year-old Black son. We have to have that conversation with him, because as much as he loves the police, as much as the high esteem that he holds them in, there are members of that population that will see harm his way, that will stand by and watch harm come his way. There are members of that population that will target him just because of the color of his skin, just because of the way he looks. It has happened. And so how do we have that conversation with him? How do we tell him this without breaking his heart, without shattering his dream, the dream that he has that the police officer and that the police of this world, of this nation, are here to support and protect and to keep safe, and that they are a group to look up to, which they are. But how do we share with him that there are some within that population that could mean harm, that could want to see harm come his way? Well, let's talk about it. Hey guys, welcome to Faith Talks with Kia, real talk for real people from a biblical worldview. Today we have a special video, a video that really is coming from a space of just what the world is going through right now. I have 2 amazing couples here with me today to talk about what we tell our sons. We see what's going on in the news. We see what's going on in our world. But what do we tell our sons? How do we raise our sons? How do we raise our kids, right? Our daughters as well, in an environment where they are living and they are showing love, but they are also wise. The Bible tells us to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. How do we do that? Well, we're going to talk about that today. I'd like to introduce the Smalls, Najma and Shaman, and I'd like to introduce the Browns, Janae and Mark. Najma, can you please give a brief introduction to your family?
Sure. I'm going to toss that over to my husband, Shaman.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for having us. So I serve as the pastor for Zion Church Woodbridge. My name is Shimon Smalls, and then of course, this is my wife, Najma Smalls. We've been married for 13 years. We have 2 beautiful children. Our oldest is Bliss, and she's 8 years old. And then our youngest is Jace, and he's 5 years old. One of the things that I do want to do, shameless plug, is I want to acknowledge that my wife is a great author of this book, which is, of course, The Black Girl's Guide to Healing Emotional Wounds, which you can pick up from all of your respective book sources, Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Nobles, and etc. So we're just happy to be here, and thank you for having us.
Amen. Amen. And Mark and Janae, would you please introduce your family?
Good afternoon. We're happy to be here. Janae and I have been married almost 11 years. We have 5 children. Our oldest, Melody, is 22. Jordan is 12. Mark is 8. Mason is 7. And Maddox is 5. So Team Brown, 7 members, and we're happy to be here.
Amen. Thank you guys so much. So let's get right to it. We all know what's going on. We've seen, unfortunately, earlier this week what's happened to George Floyd. We saw what happened with Ahmaud. We've seen what happened in the park in New York City with the bird watcher. I mean, these things and these issues that are going on, they're not new. But for some reason, this past week with George Floyd, it feels like it cuts deeper. It feels like the hurt is stronger. It feels like the tension is so much greater because of this. And I just want to talk about that. So knowing that we all have children and we talked about our children's ages, with all that's going on, what do each of you teach or have to teach your kids that our white counterparts don't have to teach their children? Mark and Janae, would you please open that up with us?
Yeah, I think one of the things, given that we are in Northern Virginia, our kids don't interact as much in their classrooms with students that look like them. And so part of that teaching also is helping them to understand who they are, understanding their self-worth and self-value. And so as we as parents are trying to raise children in schools and neighborhoods that don't necessarily reflect our community, we have to bring that piece of it in our homes. And a lot of times when we're talking to our children and we're trying to give them a broader picture, if you can't follow directions in the house, if you don't listen in the home, when you go outside of this house, the responses can be very different. And as young kids, they don't quite get it. But interestingly enough, with this new incident that happened, I was talking with our 8-year-old Mark last week, and I said, well, do you understand what's going on? What are you saying? He says, yeah, mommy, the police killed the black man. And he said, but he didn't do anything. And for an 8-year-old, he was like, why did this happen? He didn't do anything. And so helping him to grasp, what's going on, it's difficult because you have to think about, they haven't lived the years that we've lived, and trying to boil it down to an 8-year-old level, that's even challenging for us to try to think about what's really key and what's really important, because we want them to not fear people. We want them to, as we talked about, being Christians, being able to love people, but we live in a world, and how do you paint that world for your children?
Yeah, and we've talked to them about sometimes life is not fair. That, an analogy I use with the kids is that you can go and you're at work and everybody's doing the same job, but everybody's not making the same amount of money. That sometimes life is not fair. And when they go out and respect an authority, that there may be a situation and they may not like the situation, but there's a certain way that they may need to respond to the situation. That the old adage about life being 10% of what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. That there may be a situation where somebody's saying something or doing something that you don't like, but think about safety first, and that we want you to make it home and make it out of that situation. And then if it's something that you didn't like, we can address that after the fact.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting you say that, because Anthony and I have that same take, with our children, is if something ever happens, or if you ever in a situation, just get home. Comply, do what you have to do, just get home. If you can get home, we can fix it. We can work it out. We can get attorneys. We can go after badges, but you gotta get home. And the sad part is, we would love a world where that advice always resonates, but sometimes, as we can see in situations, that may not always work, but at least it's a start. At least it's a try. Get home. If you get home, we can work on it. We can work it out. We can fix it. We can go after it. We can try to, get justice for you, but you got to get home.
Right. Absolutely.
Come on. What about you guys?
So I think for us, the first thing we have to tell our children is they are not a mistake. Their race is not a mistake. Their culture is not a mistake. That their diversity was designed by God, and they bring something exciting and new to all of the spaces that they walk into, and to be proud of that, to be grateful of that. So that's the first thing where we start with our kids, is to love, as the Brown said, to love and accept themselves first. And then I think the second thing, in particular for me as a mom, I'm teaching our kids that they have to advocate for themselves. And part of that advocating for themselves is to communicate heavily with us, right? Because we all know our educational systems, it's not always fair for our kids. They are labeling our kids, particularly our Black boys. They're slapping labels on them very quickly. They don't understand our Black boys and so forth. So we encourage them to advocate for themselves by telling us when something doesn't feel right, when someone says something out of line to them, when someone doesn't give them an opportunity that they feel that they need. They have to advocate by having a conversation with us and telling us what the situation is. And we tell our children as well, it's okay to say, no, let me have a conversation with my parents. As long as you're respectful, or you can say, this doesn't feel right to me. I don't agree with this. I respect you, but I don't agree with this. Let's bring my parents into this to have a conversation. As they're getting older, and when they start driving on their own, that is one of the key things I want them to know. If they're pulled over, if they have a conversation with a cop, stop right there and say, let me bring my parents into this. Let's bring, because we all know the laws. We all know that the laws, that police officers can't have conversations with minors without their adults being around, right? So they need to bring us into the conversation, because looking back at what happened with the Central Park Five, if only their parents had been involved at the very beginning of that conversation, those young men would not have lost their freedom.
And I'd also add that I don't think it's just one conversation that we have with our children. It's going to be an ongoing dialogue that we have to make sure that they're exposed to these situations. For our kids being, adolescents, both at 8 and 5, they don't fully grasp all that's going on. So we try to expose them early, just to say, hey, these are the situations that are happening. As Mark mentioned, it's definitely unfortunate, it's unfair, and I think that's one of my daughter's favorite words right now when she finds herself getting into trouble. It's just not fair, and we just have to help walk her through just understanding that, as Mark already mentioned, life just isn't fair, and there's some rules that we have to abide by. And the way that policing happens, a lot of things are now becoming more covert, so things are evolving even more. So we have to continue to have that dialogue and keep the lines of communication open with them to let them know, hey, your parents are always going to be here to protect you. You just have to comply. And at the end of the day, I'd be remiss if I didn't say we have to cover them in prayer. And they also have to be covering themselves in prayer when they go out as well, and just be mindful that there are situations that they're going to find themselves in. And God is going to be able to help them through it, even if mom and dad aren't present. They do have a very present help by way of God to keep them safe and secure.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And with that, and again, the three of us, all three of our families kind of are living in very similar neighborhoods and environments. You know, Janae, to your point, where they're not necessarily seeing a lot of people that look like them on an everyday basis in their classrooms, on the streets, you know, as they're walking and such in their neighborhoods. And the reality is that not everybody is not, you know, the people that they are there that they encounter, not everyone is going to necessarily jump to the law, right, or doing things the right way, you know, not to your point of, you know, knowing the law. And so at some point we really have to have that conversation with them, that there are going to be people who target them specifically because of their race, specifically because of how they look like, specifically because they look different. And that there may be injustices directed towards them because of that. How do we start that conversation with them? Shaman and Najma, you have any thoughts?
Sure. So to start that conversation, one, we just can't be ignorant to what's going on. One of the things that I grew up in was a home where everything kind of got swept under the rug of, hey, you know, just mind your business. You don't need to know about that until it's time. And honestly, those conversations just never happened. So for me, I was very oblivious to what was going on around me. Like, I know that there were different interactions with other races, and I knew that the way my parents treated some of their friends were different than how they talked about their coworkers. So for me, growing up now, having kids, it's much different where I want to expose them age appropriately, to be able to walk them through where they are at their very level to say, hey, this is what you're going to be faced with. For my daughter Bliss, she has a bigger concept of life, much more than what I had at her same age. So I can actually have relatively intelligent discussions with her to walk her through, hey, here's how the police do their job. Not all police are bad. And for her, it's having to walk her through step by step of, one, the police, two, your interactions with the police, three, these are the ways that you can be treated, but also understand that, as my wife mentioned, and also you, Kia, she does have a voice. So to be mindful that you can use your voice. You don't need to shut down unless you're pleading the fifth to protect yourself. But always know that there are going to be things that your parents can do to help walk you through. So for me, it's just putting her in the mindset of, hey, if you get pulled over, what do you do? Or, hey, if you have an interaction with a police officer, what is going to be your inclination? Because you want to put them in the mindset of what a situation looks like. So that way, when you are faced with that actual situation, you have kind of muscle memory to know, hey, now that I'm in a direct encounter with a police officer or with a white person who's doing a citizen's arrest, here's how I need to conduct myself so that I can make it home safely.
Exactly. And I would say to that, the conversations, and here's where privilege comes in, right? Because we have to explain privilege to our children and help them to understand, you know, we have to be mindful of the spaces that we're in. And I know for this, Shaman and I, we've been blessed to travel all around the world, but when in certain parts of the United States, we are very mindful if we're the only Black family in the restaurant. We are very mindful. If Shaman walks down our neighborhood, even though he owns a home in this neighborhood, if he walks down down the street that he's paying taxes to live on in a hoodie, someone can perceive him as a threat. So we're teaching them to be mindful that they have to understand that not everyone values their life, and some people will just perceive them as a threat, not based on their character, not based on the fact that their parents both have master's degrees, not based on the fact that their parents both love God, not based on the fact that their parents teach them to obey the laws, but just based on the melanin that's in their skin, and they have to be aware of that. And I think that's the thing that our white counterparts, I wish if there was one thing they'd understand, is that they don't have to worry about that. And that's their privilege. They can go in any space and feel comfortable. They can walk down their neighborhood and not have to worry about two men assuming that they were breaking into a home just a few blocks away. They don't have those fears that our children have. And that's what we have to teach them, is just to be mindful of the spaces that they're in.
You're right. And you know what's funny is I had an actual personal example of that. You know, right now we in Corona quarantine and everything, every day we try to find a new place to walk to, a new, path to walk just to get some outside time. So the kids and I are walking, and we're walking down a street, maybe just a few blocks over. Actually, Janae and Mark, not far from where you live. We're just walking down a random block, and I happen to see someone that we have met through other neighbors. And as I'm walking by, I just kind of put up my hand and say hello. And as we were walking by, I heard he doesn't know that I heard him. I heard him say to a neighbor that he was out there talking to, "Oh, I know them." So that made me think that a conversation or a dialogue had been going on between these two white men, right, in Fairfax, Virginia, of who is this family walking down our street. But then when I waved the hand and he saw who we were, and he said, "Oh, I do know them." It was something like, "Oh, I knew them." Then it was okay, right? Then we were accepted because we were known. But had I been a white mother with my two small children, I doubt that any conversation would have ever happened.
Wow.
Those are the real, and I'm talking 2 weeks ago, right? Not 30 years, 2 weeks ago. So those are the real life examples of things that we have to teach our children. Najma, to your point, that our white counterparts, that our white friends, that even our white family members at times don't have to worry about. And my kids weren't the wiser, and I didn't even take the time out to explain to them what happened, because I'm like, let's just keep going on this. And because I had just heard it out the corner of my ear, but it happened. And I know that there was a deeper conversation between those two that made me hear what he heard. And I believe it was the Holy Ghost that allowed me to hear that. So I know just what we're dealing with. Amen.
Amen. Yeah.
Hey, how about you guys? How do you start that conversation with your children, with your boys?
I think that we were a little bit forced this past year with one of our children. He was on the soccer team, the only African-American boy on the soccer team, but he was good friends with all of them. And the assistant coach overheard one of the young boys calling our son the N-word, whether it was playfully or what have you. And the coach brought it to us apart from the situation. He called up Mark and they had a conversation. He said, "I just want to make you aware." He didn't reveal who the child was, but he said, "I just wanted to make you aware and understand what your thoughts are." And Mark said, "I'm fine with you approaching that parent and talking with them." But once he found out who it was, the coach talked with the parent. Once he found out, this was a kid that we knew that Mark had played with. One of the things that was enlightening to us was that our son at the time, it really didn't impact him because he really didn't understand the word itself, and probably had heard it, in a song, or the friend had heard it in a song or what have you. But that whole situation is what kind of forced us to start having that conversation, because, he was oblivious to it and we were appalled by it. And even when Mark had the conversation with the parent, he was so apologetic, so embarrassed by it, and that sort of thing. So that really says that, we have to have those conversations with children, because otherwise, how do they know, right? They're not going to learn it in school, because we understand how history is taught in school is just kind of, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, and thank God for their contributions. But the reality of it is we've got to really give our kids the true history, the real talk of how our people have been oppressed, and how we are seen in society, and the things that we are judged on that other people are not. And so you want to add to that?
That's right.
I think Shaman and myself are aligned. He hit the nail on the head when he talked about the houses that we grew up in and how a lot of things were swept under the carpet, and just conversations that our parents did not have with us. That, I think in the day and age that we're living in, that our parenting style may be a little bit different, where we're forced to have these conversations with our kids. And it's conversations and letting your kids know that there's nothing that they can't talk to us about. That, X may go wrong, but just know we may not like it, but you can come to us and we can have a conversation and figure it out.
That's right.
That relationship with the kids. No, we're not your friends, but we're your parents, and you can have a relationship with your parents that we communicate and we can talk about anything. I think another point that was brought up, Shimon, when you talked about situationally aware, I talk to my kids all the time about being situationally aware of what is going on around you. And Janae gave an example of, the N word is being used and our son is oblivious to the meaning and, that it's a negative connotation in regards to the N word. Because we had the conversation with him and asked him, he's like, well, it didn't bother me, etc. And, blood's running through my veins thinking it should have bothered you. Do you know if somebody had called your dad that word, it probably would have been a different conversation. So it forced us earlier than we would have expected or wanted to have the conversation. But opening up those lines of communication with your kids and having the conversations about being situationally aware of what's going on around you, when something happens, what your reaction may be, and just going through scenarios. Kia, I think you hit on this, going through scenarios. If you're pulled over, if this happens, talked about if something happens at school, you want to involve your parents, because there are some things that kids may not think about, but just that point saying, can we bring my parents into this and let my parents be a voice for me, an advocate for me, because my parents have a little bit more experience with this situation, and then we can work through it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you guys, Mark and Janae, I'll start with you guys on this. What advice do you have to other parents who might be facing these same issues that maybe just don't know what to do, that are feeling lost right now and helpless?
I think it's environments like we're in today. You've pulled together this particular Zoom meeting and you have 3 couples that are sitting down having the conversations. You've started a fire that more conversations need to happen. And not only within our community of color, conversations outside of our community of color. On Friday, I received a text message from my roommate from college, who is a Caucasian guy, and a long text message where he just expressed, don't know how you're feeling about what's going on. And he talked about how he's feeling and how bad he felt for the community and what was happening. And he started to have Saturday morning, I got another text message where there's a group of friends from college and there's about 12 other African-American males that were on that text message. And he's the only white guy on there, but people are starting to have the conversation. And it's conversation with our kids and it's conversation with other couples, not just within the Black community, but outside of our community as well. Talking about, I was at work and there was a statement that was made and I could read the body language around the room where people were like, wow, I can't believe that person said that. Mm-hmm. So after we got off of the VTC, the person what was heading up the meeting looked around the table towards the African-American members and asked, was that, really of concern, or was it a derogative, statement that the person had made? And when we enlightened the person that was the head of the meeting, they got it, that we were looking through a completely different lens than the other person was looking through, helping them understand how that made the people around the table feel. Because I read the body language. People cringed when the statement was made.
Yeah. And when you said talking about how do we as parents help those who are lost or don't know, there's no manual for parenting, right? All of our kids are unique. We have to know them. We have to talk with them because it's amazing the things that they're thinking about. So sometimes you have to ask them the questions, right? And really see where they're coming from and what they think about things so that you can then give them your perspective and give them a little more information or whatever they need in order to then better cope and better understand. Because a lot of times, it's been too long since we were kids, right? We can say, oh, I was a kid once, but right now you're not thinking as a child, right? Or at least you shouldn't be, right? So you have to talk with them to understand really where's their mind, what's going on and what are their thoughts regarding things. So that's the starting point, I think.
Absolutely. And Shaman and Najma, what are your thoughts? What advice do you give to parents who are just lost and just feeling hopeless?
I think just echoing what the Browns said, keep the dialogue. I think it's important for us to start having those conversations and ask questions. I ask my daughter every single day, what happened at school? What hurt you? What made you happy? What hurt you? Because like you said, sometimes things may happen that make them feel a little uncomfortable and they don't really know how to address it or they don't know how to verbalize it. So I ask those questions and I'll take my own childhood. I went to a predominantly white school. I was one of very few in my class. It was me and one other Black kid. And there were a lot of things that were said and were done that I knew didn't feel right, but I didn't know how to have that conversation. And nobody was asking me, so I just kept it all in here. So I would just encourage parents to have those conversations with their kids, talk to them daily, and keep the line of communication open so that they will want to have those dialogues. And agreeing with what the Browns said, we need to include our white counterparts in our conversations. Just the same as Mark said, some of my friends have messaged me as well and just saying the same sentiments, expressing how hurt they are, asking me how I felt and so on. And just started the dialogue, just started asking questions about our experiences, because I think the one thing that may be missing sometimes is that empathy from our white counterparts, understanding, not sympathy, but understanding what it's like to be a Black man that has to worry about being profiled, to be a mother. I think that video of George Floyd struck, if you have a heart, and especially if you're a mother, and to know that that man died calling his mother's name, you couldn't get past it. And so I think that video did cause people to have some empathy in that moment, but just trying to empathize with what our situation is and being a Black mother, that's a concern that we have. When we send our kids out there into the world, when without us, we don't know what's gonna happen. And that worries me. That's a huge worry for us. So just having that empathy, and I think keeping the conversation going is one of the best things we can do.
That's good. Just to add to that, I think the solution is almost twofold. One of the words that you said that stuck out to me was hopeless. And I think for us as a people, we can't forfeit our hope any longer. Like, that's something that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we need to hold on to, because we know that that's what is going to get us over. I can believe that that's what our ancestors held on to one day see that we will be able to sit at tables that we didn't even know existed, or to be able to sit in spaces, to be able to control certain avenues that we didn't even know existed. So I think for us, we have to continue to hold on to our hope beyond anything that we're faced with. And then on the back end, I think the second part of that is we have to be action-oriented on a twofold stance. One, as parents, we need to educate our children to make sure that they're self-aware of what's going on. But two, we probably need to also educate ourselves. Like, we need to know who our district attorneys are. We need to know who our city councilmen are. We need to know who our governors are if we don't even know who those individuals are, because those are the policymakers that can put effective change in place to be able to protect people that look like us. and to also be able to challenge and change the dynamic of people that they sit at the table with. So even if we aren't at the table, they need to be able to sit at the table to do the checks as though they are us. So I think, you know, to your point, Mark, it is very well said that you guys had the opportunity to check it, but I think on the flip side, it'll be success when we see that they're able to check their own people, because we've been trying to bring this to their attention too long. We need them to be able to, as my wife already mentioned, empathize with us when we aren't at the table. So they need to start to check themselves. And I think that's the hope that we can stand on as we move forward from the situation.
I just want to say that I think the Smalls are over there preaching. They bringing the word. I wanted to say, man, so many times. You're over there breaking the word on Sunday. I appreciate the Smalls.
You know, this
And
situation.
Shaman, you just said something. Now I was going to say, Shaman just said something that my daughter talked about this morning, that a lot of times before we go to the polls, we need to research the candidates and learn about them. She's 22 years old and she's ahead of her time. I've told her that. But she just said at the breakfast table this morning about researching candidates before we go and vote, because a lot of times we just go and vote and we don't know anything about the candidates. And Shaman, when you talked about knowing who the governors are, the lieutenant governor, the district attorney, who are your representatives in Congress, that it's really important, because these are the policymakers that are making decisions on our behalf.
Yeah.
So you said the word and a mouthful. Thank you, the Smalls.
That's right. That's right. That's so relevant, and it's so, you know, important right now. And I like the point that both Shaman and Mark, that both of you guys, I think we've all kind of touched on it a little bit, you know, with our white counterparts, with the politicians, with all of these individuals. How do we communicate with them how they can help? Obviously, we vote the proper politicians in office, but, you know, taking it one step down below that, how do we just communicate where and how they can help?
I think one of the things that'll really help, and this is something that I'll probably look to put into action, is they just need to know us. Like, it goes back to that very same point that you mentioned earlier. Like, you were out on the walk, and though it was uncomfortable, to me, that was like a God moment of, if they know you and can put a face to who you are, then it makes them less uncomfortable with being around you. And I think the media just does a poor job of portraying us. Whitewashing, you know, certain things, whether it be the backdrop of the Bible, whether it be us on TV shows or in movies. I just think there's just a stereotypical portrayal of us as just people. And I think what's good is that we're now in places where we can start to change the narrative by way of shaping how media happens for us. Even though the movie that did great, Queen and Slim, was just a movie to show, hey, here's what we're faced with. Like, we could just be heading home after a nice day, get pulled over by a cop, comply, and still have to face intimidation and some of those, you know, just, I would just say wrong tactics is probably the best way to put it, because I want to choose my words very carefully when I say it. But I just think having an ongoing dialogue with just helping them understand, you know, I'm Shaman. Like, I'm a person who came up in this neighborhood. I haven't robbed liquor stores. I haven't sold drugs. I haven't had kids out of wedlock. You know, I've went to these schools. Like, just understand me as a person is just the best way to kind of break down that wall. So that way, if they're walking at night and they see me jogging in a hoodie, like, I'm not a threat. I'm literally just trying to get some exercise. And that's just something that, you know, right now I'm just cognizant of. Like, I just wonder, like, hey, if I just decide to wake up at 10 o'clock at night, because usually I'm a night owl and that's how I kind of work through my ideas, can I jog outside at night with a hoodie on, or do I need to wear a reflective vest? Like, those are just questions that now I have to walk through. And I think just having a dialogue with someone who doesn't look like me, help them understand these are the pressures, or these are the thoughts and the ideas that run through my head. Hopefully the light bulb will go off for them to be able to understand, like, oh, I never really saw it like that. Like, I can go jogging and not have to worry. I wonder if you would have flipped the shoe on the other foot, like me trying to make a citizen's arrest, what would that look like? Like, they can do it, but hey, if I try to do it, God forbid what I'd see at the end of it.
And I want to add on to that is for our white friends is to question though your deepest thoughts, right? Question your prejudices. Why do you get concerned when you see a Black man walking through your neighborhood with a hoodie on at night? Question those thoughts. It's okay to question those thoughts and peel back those layers and think about what notions and ideas that may be toxic you were brought into your upbringing that you may need to kind of cleanse yourself from, and to also ask the questions. It's okay to ask us, to ask people, and I also want to encourage our Black community to be open to that, to be open and not defensive when they do ask questions. Why are you protesting? Why are you, ask the questions instead of just saying, going to the words, the buzzwords, thugs. Ask the questions. At first seek to understand, then make your thought process. But try to understand where we're coming from. And it goes back to that empathy that we need to be. That's the only way we're going to live in unity is if we empathize, if there's some empathy there.
That's right. That's right. No, I totally agree. When we talk about communication, the thing with communication is it's a two-way street, right? So for our, for our white friends, for our white counterparts, for our white coworkers, in our community, just to your point, Najma, you said it the perfect way, just that empathy, understanding, just to understand, even if you've never seen it, even if you've never felt it, this is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. This is how, you feel when you're going through that. These are some real life examples. There's going to be someone that watches this video that hears, my story about the walk, and they're going to say, oh no, not in Fairfax, that would never happen. Yes, it can, and it will. And I'm sure that's just a one small clipping in time, but I'm sure if we took a poll, there's probably lots of instances in Northern Virginia and other areas where similar things have happened, even worse things, right? Because at the end of the day, we weren't hurt or anything, but you know what that mentality is, right? And there's so much more that could have come from that, So, if I had been, a Black man in a hoodie running down that same street on that day, Shaman, to your point, what would have been the conversation between those neighbors, or what would their take have been, or if they hadn't realized that they didn't know us at all, if the fact that we were familiar hadn't come to that gentleman's mind, what would their response have been? Would they have questioned us? Would they have stopped us? Would they have called the cops on us? Who knows, right? So just getting them to have that empathy, and to our own, brothers and sisters, like you said, Najma, just being understanding and just, not jumping to the defensive. If somebody comes to us for a conversation, take that opportunity to be salt and light. Take that opportunity to actually share, hey, these are my experiences. This is what I've dealt through. These are the things I have to teach my sons. These are the things that I have to tell my daughter. This is how we have to, do life, right? In this culture and in this environment, and say it in a way that resonates, that's not defensive, that's not, in your face, but that will resonate. Because if we want empathy, we're going to have to speak and communicate in a way that resounds with who we're talking to.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
So Mark,
I was
going to say Mark and Janae, yeah, please.
We really don't take advantage of making our voices heard. Are we really the ones writing the letters? Are we really the ones showing up at the town halls? Sometimes when it really impacts us, right? But our white counterparts, they're making sure that their voice is being heard. They're writing those letters into their representatives. They're writing those letters to whomever, right? To make their voice known. And are we doing enough of that, or are we just kind of living life? A lot of times when we have, that structured, hey, we need to make an impact on this particular law or what have you, and people are really mobilized, it makes a difference. It's a total difference. And I think we're kind of missing that. There's power in unity, and as a community, we need to become a little more unified, right? To really make the impacts. And that's what you're talking about, that how do we communicate what we need? How do we communicate how to better interact with our communities and things like that? So I think we could really use some of the tactics that a lot of our counterparts use.
And I'd like to
Absolutely.
add to it that when we think about conversations, Kia, this was an excellent idea to pull 3 couples together. And with that saying, using the term grassroots conversations. When you think about a fire and how a fire starts, there are some explosions, but a lot of times a fire starts with a spark. So what you have done here today with these 3 couples, it's the spark. And with the platforms that we have that 20, 30 years ago were not available, you starting a spark. And if that spark can grow into fires, meaning conversations, it can go a long way.
Amen. 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 Thank you for that, Mark. Thank you for that. And amen. And I thank all of you guys, right, for, for coming in and being a part of this conversation, because Mark, to your point, I really believe in the spirit that this is necessary, that these dialogues are necessary. And Mark, to your point, that it grows and that, and that it becomes a part of the culture. A lot of times, the church follows the culture, but no, I believe the church needs to start the culture. The church gotta have to start, and then let the church influence the culture. You have 3 different churches, represented on this call right now here in Northern Virginia. And then, of course, within our networks, however many, more churches are connected with that. If the church stands up and starts a dialogue, we can influence their culture. And I really do believe that. And my prayer is that that's exactly what will happen, that we'll start having these dialogues, that Black churches, white churches, mainstream churches, international churches will all start coming together. Because we have one foundation. There's one Bible. There's one body. There's one text. And so that we will all come together and just start talking and having this conversation, and hopefully we can influence and change the culture. And, I thank you for coming. But as we wrap up, Janae and Mark, I'm going to point this over to you first. As we wrap up, from your perspective, what are the next steps?
I think the next steps are that we keep the fire burning. There's been a spark here today. And as you talked about that, we started this spark. There are 3 different churches that are represented. We have networks of friends and professional colleagues that, we're a part of, that we just keep the conversations going, that the conversation just stop here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, otherwise we end up in the same cycle, right? This isn't the first time that a Black man has been killed by a police officer, right? There's countless names that are out there, and then people get upset, and then there's a bunch of conversation, and then it dies back down. And it's like, I think at this point, considering what we're seeing, what's happening across the nation, that it's not going to die down so easy. So really, the next steps are in our prospective regions, what are the things that we do need to be addressing. And we really need some leaders to rise up, right? Because it seems like, if there's no leader, people, what do? We're all kind of looking like, okay, I could do this, I could do that, but it's not really impactful. So, we need some leaders to rise up to help unify us as one, to make, our voices heard.
Amen. Amen. Najma and Shaman, what are your thoughts as we wrap up? What, for your perspective, what are the next steps?
You want to take it?
Yeah, I can start off. I think that there's a lot of passion that's out there right now, particularly because of this incident. And I think, or the recent incidents over the past 2 weeks, I think we need to continue to build on that. I think we need to mobilize ourselves. I think that we need to do what we can to change legislations, to change the way our police officers are trained, to change the way that they are reviewed and monitored. I like the idea of independent police review boards and so forth. But I think that we also, and I think Mark touched on it, this is a heart issue too, right? And so this is where our churches come into play. We need leadership within our churches, and we need to continue to keep the conversations going, because what we're dealing with is a heart issue, right? If someone can do these things to another human being, to sit on someone's neck with their knee, that's a heart issue. That's a broken spirit that's inside of them. And those issues, that spirit is what needs to be addressed right now.
It's all been said very well. One of the things that I do think that we need to do as a church collectively is we need to start looking at human rights issues a lot more, with a lot more scrutiny. Is probably the best way to look at it. Because to be honest, I think we're very concerned about making sure that the Bible is taught and that we get people saved. But after that, I think that's where things kind of go off a cliff. It's like, okay, now that you're in the family, just go off and you'll do well. But I think we need to start to educate just the body of believers as a whole to say, you know what, this is not just a book about just getting saved. As it says in James 2, faith without works is dead. So it's not enough to just have faith. We need to start putting our works behind it and start to educate our body to understand that, hey, we now have a responsibility to make sure that we're protecting not only just those who are saved, but also the unsaved, because they need love just as much as our fellow Christian brothers and sisters do. So the best way we can do this is to make sure that we stand up and say, you know what, there's human rights issues at stake. It's great that we've gotten you saved, but we need to also broaden your lens to understand that there's human rights that need to be observed and to be memorialized and be able to be protected by all parties. And we as Christians, like you said, Kia, we need to set that culture going forward. I think we've taken a standoffish stance to it, but I think this is where the church can really step in. It's not to say that we go into politics and all that other jazz, but we do need to be on the forefront to say, you know what, we need to start standing up for human rights issues and to make sure that people are protected.
Amen. Amen. Well, guys, like I said, thank you so much for just joining us today. Thank you so much for walking this journey. And just thank you so much for all your input and your guidance. I truly believe that, to Mark's point, you said it best, that this is going to be a fire. This is a spark, bigger fire, and that we're going to start the dialogue. And I'm just praying in Jesus' name that, that this is one small piece in the pie, but that it will grow, that it will, manifest itself into something bigger, throughout the kingdom, that will allow us, the kingdom, the church, to be able to influence the culture. Amen. Thank you, guys.
Amen. Amen.
Hey, everybody. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here for the original taping of this episode. We all know what's going on out there right now with the protests and everything, and I had to be called to duty to basically to assist with some of the preparation, everything going on out there in the nation's capital. With that being said, I do want to talk about some of these things real briefly, so we can close this video out. A lot of things were hit on the other day. I heard hope. I heard, what do we do next? And you know what? Everything that was said was right. And we do have to remember that we are people of adversity. When we got to this country, our ancestors were brought here against their own will. And you know what? When you hear the stories, they still had hope. They had hopes of freedom. They had hopes of moving forward. Now it's our turn. Everybody that came before us did their part to try to make this a better place. And that's really what we need to teach our kids. As bad as it is, everybody has did their part. Now it's our turn to do our part and teach our kids the lessons, let them know where they came from, and have pride in that. And let them know that they are just as good as that kid walking down the street, even when people are looking at them funny, when people ask questions. And you know what? To let them know everybody has their struggles. Because just because we live in an area of Northern Virginia that isn't that bad, they still can't do the things that their counterparts do. When my son walks down the street and he's the only black kid in a group of white kids, he needs to know that he does stick out. You're not like the rest of them. It's unfair. It's unfair that, those kids can yell and holler at somebody and all everybody's going to remember is the black kid's face because he was the one that was different. He was the one. It's not fair, but it is the reality we live in. He needs to know that he can't do the same things that they can do. When they get stopped in a car and his white friend asks a bunch of questions and talks back and there's no response, he needs to know that he won't get the same reaction if he does the same thing. It's unfair, but these are the realities that we face. So, again, we do have to have hope. I think the final question that was asked was, what do? We don't let up. Like my brother Mark said, we got to keep the fire burning. So often, and we see it so many things, because I mean, us as a people, we have short-timers memory. We concentrate on the here and now, and then as soon as it's going, we're on to the next thing. No, we need to keep this fire burning. We need to keep moving. We need to, when our elected politicians come into our neighborhoods and say, oh yeah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. A day later, a week later, a month later, a year later, they need to be fulfilling that. And we need to be in their offices. We need to be in their emails. We need to be on their phones. Where's the promises you made? What are you doing to move forward? And don't just give us lip service. If you're not about it, we need to vote you out, and we need to vote for people that are in our best interest. And in my eyes, too long, we've just been voting for people to give us lip service. So I wish I had more time to say more, because this is a conversation that every brother in every church and every sister, but as Black men, we have to lift that torch, and we have to be the leaders that God ordained us to be. I mean, so many of us aren't doing what we should and what we need to be doing. And I can tell the two brothers that we had on this call tonight, I can tell that we're up for the fight. And this is a fight that we're not going to let go. AJ is going to be prepared when his time comes.
That's right.
All right. I think that's all I really have time for today. I wish I had more. Look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Look forward to talking to some of you guys. And we will carry this forward.
That's right. Amen. And let's not forget what the Bible says about justice and injustice. Amos 5:27 says, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. We have to remember that the only real, true solution to racial injustice and the racial divide in this country is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The only real path to racial reconciliation is Jesus Christ. We have to remember that He is the only way. And as we close out today, I want to close with this. There are some song lyrics from one of my grandmother's favorite songs, and I printed them out, and it reads like this. He that the sun sets free is free indeed. No more chains of slavery. Truth has triumphed with victory. He that the sun sets free is free indeed. Now I belong to Jesus. I'm a child of the King. I traded filthy garments for a robe of royalty. The chains that used to bind me are laying at my feet. You see, the devil can't make a lock that the Lord doesn't hold the key. He that the sun sets free is free indeed. God bless, and let's talk soon.